to start off by apologizing for the quality of this video. It is awfully grainy. I am not using my iPhone to record. It is dead and I want to record now. So my apologies. I'm jumping the gun on this. Secondly, I would like to say that I am going to start releasing more videos more frequently, but they're going to be kind of different. I think I'm going to be focusing less on like trigger videos and more on like essay style videos, simply because I like to write essays. I write them frequently. I think it's engaging, and I like to think that you can relax while also being educated. And that is it for the most part. Though I would like to add this, I am going to be talking about a pretty serious topic today, if you can tell from the title. And I know that this topic requires a lot of nuance. It requires a bit of gentleness, and I think that some people might think that it is odd for me to talk about this certain topic in particular when making an ASMR video, but like I said, I like to write essays. This is entirely my own work. I have cited sources. It is done exactly as it is needed to be done. I think that this format might be a little bit strange to some, but I think that you can relax by being educated on something important, and it's funky and I like it. I like to make ASMR, and also I like to write about things that matter to me, and hopefully they matter to you as well. This is a critique on the education system regarding eating disorders. Every day in American schools, students walk into classrooms with pretty much invisible struggles. Some have diagnosed developmental disorders like autism or ADHD, which are formally recognized in their school plans. Others, however, battle something that is less understood but just as damaging. I am speaking today on eating disorders. Now, these are not just issues of body image or food. Eating disorders have real, measurable impacts on how students think, focus, and learn. And yet, despite their severity, they are virtually absent from the ways that schools collect data, design lessons, and provide support. Let me be clear. Eating disorders are serious mental health conditions. Anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorders affect millions of adolescents in the United States alone. According to the National Eating Disorders Association, or NEDA, an estimated 10% of teens struggle with an eating disorder at some point during their formative schooling years. But beyond the emotional toll, eating disorders also harm the brain. Malnutrition from restrictive eating affects working memory, information processing, and attention span. Even mild nutritional deficiencies can disrupt neurotransmitter production, which is essential for learning and memory. How can a student be expected to retain information in classes like algebra and biology when their brain is literally starved of fuel? Now, let's examine how schools typically address learning differences. Under federal law, specifically the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, schools are required to provide individualized support for students with exceptionalities. These include developmental disabilities like autism spectrum disorders, intellectual disabilities, and ADHD. These students might receive accommodations through IEPs, or individualized education programs, which are based on school-collected data, psychological assessments, and teacher observations. This system works when a condition is recognized. The standing issue, however, eating disorders do not qualify. Eating disorders are not classified as developmental disabilities. As a result, they are typically excluded from school databases that track student needs. This means that students with eating disorders do not get learning accommodations, not because they do not need them, but because the system isn't built to recognize their challenges. In fact, most schools don't even collect data on students with eating disorders at all. There is little to no training for teachers or even student counselors to recognize the academic impacts of eating disorders. When a student zones out, misses school, or falls behind, their struggles are often mislabeled as laziness or simple disengagement. In reality, their brain might just be in survival mode. Studies have shown that adolescents adolescents with anorexia may have decreased gray matter volume in regions of the brain responsible for memory or emotional regulation. Students with bulimia might often struggle with impulsivity, mood instability, and poor concentration, all of which affect learning. So, why do we not treat these cognitive symptoms the same way we treat those caused by ADHD or learning disabilities? The answer may lie in stigma, outdated definitions of educational need, and a lack of cross-training between health and education systems. There is a significant link between eating disorders and diminished cognitive retention and social isolation, compounded by a school system that fails to provide comprehensive education or adequate programs for support. This negligence ignores the complex psychological mechanisms such as magical thinking and obsessive-compulsive traits that underlie these disorders, ultimately allowing for them to fester untreated into adulthood. In the academic setting, students are expected to learn, retain information, and form social bonds that aid their personal and intellectual growth. However, for individuals struggling with eating disorders, these basic expectations can become monumental tasks. Anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder, and other specified feeding or eating disorders, or OSFED, deeply impair a student's ability to think clearly, connect with peers, and manage daily academic responsibilities. Unfortunately, despite the prevalence of these conditions among adolescents and young adults, schools often lack programs and resources that acknowledge or address these challenges. This video critiques the current education system's negligence in both its curriculum and support services, arguing that the complexity of eating disorders, including the often overlooked role of magical thinking, demands a more informed and compassionate institutional response. Health classes in secondary school often aim to cover a wide range of topics, from nutrition and exercise to drug prevention and sexual education. However, the discussion of eating disorders is typically superficial at best. Many curriculums focus on the physical dangers of malnutrition or purging behaviors, rarely delving into the psychological roots of the disorder or the lived experiences of those who suffer. As a result, students may leave high school with only a vague understanding of what an eating disorder actually entails. Now, this lack of depth can be dangerous. Without nuanced education, early warning signs go unnoticed, not only by peers and teachers, but by individuals themselves. A person may believe that they are simply dieting or being healthy and failing to recognize the obsessive and self-destructive patterns that define disordered eating. The absence of any conversation around male sufferers, non-binary individuals, or the intersection of eating disorders and other mental health issues further isolates those who don't fit the stereotypical profile. The effects of eating disorders go far beyond physical health. Malnutrition, obsessive behaviors, and preoccupation with weight or food intake severely impairs cognitive function, as I have mentioned. Research shows that students with eating disorders not only experience memory deficits, but also difficulty with decision making, both which contribute to a diminished ability to retain academic information. These cognitive impairments are not merely byproducts of starvation, they are fueled by the psychological load of disorders, including self-critical thoughts, anxiety, and compulsive routines. Socially, eating disorders can be equally debilitating. The intense shame and secrecy often associated with disordered eating isolates individuals from their peers. Many sufferers avoid social gatherings where food is involved, decline invitations to eat out, or disengage from conversations that might touch on body image or appearance. Over time, this avoidance behavior erodes friendships, contributing to an intense sense of alienation and loneliness that reinforces the disorder itself. Students who are trapped in this cycle may come to see their disorder not only as a coping mechanism, but as a companion as well, one that replaces the need for real human connection. A particularly complex psychological component of many eating disorders is magical thinking, which I have mentioned. Magical thinking is a cognitive distortion more commonly associated with obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD, but highly prevalent in those with anorexia, bulimia, and related conditions. Magical thinking involves the belief that certain actions, thoughts, or rituals have special powers. For instance, a believe that eating fewer calories will shield them from illness, failure, or emotional pain. This belief persists even in the face of logic or even medical evidence. In individuals with eating disorders, magical thinking often manifests as a distorted sense of invincibility. They may acknowledge the risks of starving or purging, but believe that they are somehow immune to these consequences. Others may suffer, but I will not becomes an unspoken mantra. This kind of thinking can make treatment particularly difficult, as it renders individuals resistant to intervention. They cannot be convinced to seek help if they believe they do not truly need it. Furthermore, magical thinking reinforces the idea that their disorder is a form of control or protection against a chaotic world. This illusion of safety makes letting go of the disorder terrifying, as doing so would mean confronting vulnerability head-on. As people transition into adulthood, retaining an eating disorder becomes more difficult and more dangerous. The increased demands of adult life, career responsibilities, financial stress, relationships can clash with the rigid routines that eating disorders often require. Unlike high school or college, where structured environments allow rituals to persist unnoticed, adult life introduces more unpredictability, making the maintenance of a disorder more visible and unsustainable. Adult sufferers often find themselves with even fewer resources. Pediatric or school-based interventions are no longer available, and adult mental health care often prioritizes other disorders deemed more urgent, more treatable. The stigma surrounding adult eating disorders, especially in men and gender non-conforming individuals, further discourage people from seeking help. What begins as a coping mechanism in adolescence can evolve into a chronic, lifelong condition if not treated with urgency and understanding. The failure of the educational system to properly address eating disorders is a form of institutional neglect. By providing only surface-level information, ignoring the psychological intricacies of the disorder, and failing to support students socially and academically, schools allow the illnesses to grow in silence. Eating disorders are not simply about appearance. They are complex, multifaceted conditions that impair cognition, erode social bonds, and often involve deeply ingrained cognitive distortions. As students grow older, the burden of the disorder intensifies, and the lack of early intervention becomes a lifelong handicap. To truly support student well-being, schools must implement comprehensive mental health education, create accessible support programs, and foster environments where vulnerability is met with compassion, not dismissal. Here is what I believe needs to change. First, schools must begin screening for eating disorders as part of their broader mental health initiatives. Second, educators need training, not just to recognize physical signs of eating disorders, but to understand how they affect learning. Eating disorders should be considered under temporary or situational impairments, which could make students eligible for support through RTI or response to intervention. Third, we need updated policies that allow flexibility in lesson planning for students struggling with mental health, even if those struggles fall outside traditional exceptionalities. Most importantly, we need more research, specifically in the context of school systems, on how eating disorders affect academic achievement. Students with eating disorders are not asking for special treatment. They're asking to be seen and understood, to be taught in a way that recognizes their full humanity. Learning does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in a body with a mind. Every student deserves a chance to succeed, even when the success looks different than what we expect. I believe it is time to expand our definition of exceptional learners as a whole. Eating disorders do not have to be invisible in our schools. If you are an educator or an educator in progress, ask your school what training protocols exist for supporting students with eating disorders. If you are a student with an eating disorder, reach out. You are not alone, I promise. Learning should never, ever be a punishment. Eating disorders are often misunderstood. Their complexities have nuance. When I reflect on my own struggles, I think of how they are rooted in 80% of control, fear, and shame. For many, that is when the battle starts. Personally, I think the term battle is quite unrefined, but it is fitting, because the journey, the fallout, those ripple far beyond the early moments. The reality is that eating disorders are isolating. The toll they take on the body is extremely significant. Over time, extreme malnutrition or binging can lead to devastating consequences. Heart disease is one of the more frightening outcomes. The heart can literally be weakened, and irregularities and in extreme cases can result in sudden death. Also, depression becomes a constant companion. It is as if your mind is in a fog and you cannot escape the weight of your own thoughts. This is not the depression that we talk about in passing. This is a clinical, pervasive kind of despair, one that clings to you, making it harder to believe that things could ever improve. While the risks to oneself are clear, it's perhaps the silent impact on your relationships that go most unnoticed. Family, friends, partners, they don't know how to help. And for those caught in the disorder, knowing how to explain is a challenge. A wall goes up between you and the people that you love the most. Over time, the distance becomes harder to bridge. Relationships erode, trust disappears, and connection feels kind of like a memory. The nervous system is particularly vulnerable, and the longer someone lives with an eating disorder, the more significant the damage. Simple tasks that once felt effortless, like remembering a conversation, speaking clearly, or concentrating, become monumental challenges. For many, it feels like you're losing yourself piece by piece. It may seem like you're in control, but it's your body and your mind that end up paying the price. The reality is that it's a war with yourself, and it's a war that feels impossible to win alone. The fact of the matter is, eating disorders do not develop in a vacuum. They are often deeply intertwined with the experiences that we have during the most formative years of our lives. For many, the seeds of an eating disorder are sown in childhood adolescence, where external pressures, trauma, and unhealthy environments can set the stage for a disordered relationship with food. It is important to understand that eating disorders are not just about vanity or wanting to look a certain way. They often develop as coping mechanisms, protective strategies against pain that might feel otherwise unbearable. A significant factor in this development is bullying, especially when it comes to body image. Young people who are subjected to cruel teasing, comments about their weight or appearance, or social rejection based on how they look often begin to internalize these judgments, gradually coming to believe that their worth is somehow tied to their physical form. In these cases, the desire to control one's body becomes a way to regain a sense of power over the overwhelming feelings of helplessness or shame. In addition to bullying, childhood trauma, particularly sexual abuse or neglect, contribute to the development of eating disorders. Trauma often distorts one's sense of self-control and worth, leading to behaviors that try to exert a sense of agency over a situation that feels out of control. The pain of trauma can also literally be buried in the body, and restricting food, binging, or purging may feel like ways to manage that overwhelming emotional weight. Equally impactful is the role of neurosocietal or familial mindsets. Children who grow up in environments that emphasize perfectionism, overly strict expectations, or an unrealistic focus on appearance may feel immense pressure to conform. This pressure can come from well-meaning adults who perhaps unconsciously reinforce harmful standards of how a body should look. In these situations, a child might learn to equate success, love, or even safety with external approval, leading to distorted self-image and unhealthy coping strategies. If you or someone you know is struggling with an eating disorder, please know that help is available. Reaching out for support is not a sign of weakness, but a powerful step towards healing. NIDA is a great resource, offering a variety of tools, support groups, and educational resources to help those in need. NIDA's website offers online chats, tech supports, and a wealth of information to help navigate these challenges of eating disorders. If you are located in the United States and need immediate help, you can contact the National Eating Disorder Hotline at 1-800-931-2237. Whether you're looking for resources, guidance, or just someone to talk to, this is a free, confidential service available to anyone in crisis. When we think of eating disorders, we often picture a certain stereotype. Young, white, affluent women struggling with issues like anorexia, bulimia, or binge eating. While these are certainly significant groups at risk, the reality is that eating disorders do not discriminate. They affect individuals across all walks of life, from different races, genders, and backgrounds. The complexities of how and why eating disorders develop go far beyond the surface, and the factors contributing to these struggles are often more subtle and layered than they initially may seem. Now, it is true that young women make up a significant portion of those affected by eating disorders. This can factor into so many young students falling behind, being ignored by educators who might have their eyes on other targets who may need help. The pressure on girls girls and young women to meet societal standards of beauty, often defined by thinness, has been pervasive for decades. From the media we consume to the expectations we internalize from friends, family, and social circles, there is an overwhelming sense that beauty is synonymous with being thin. This societal obsession can be internalized, leading to extreme behaviors. It is crucial to acknowledge that this pressure is not only external. For many young women, food becomes a way to exert control in an environment where they feel powerless in other areas of their lives. However, eating disorders obviously don't just impact white women. Race can play a significant role in the development and expression of eating disorders, though it is often overlooked in mainstream conversations. For people of color, eating disorders can intersect with unique cultural pressures such as familial expectations and radicalized beauty standards that prioritize different body types. Comments about body shape, hair texture, and skin tone from both within and outside of one's racial or ethnic community can have profound impact on self-esteem and worth. For example, Black, Latino, and Asian communities often face pressures to conform to Eurocentric ideals of beauty, which may diametrically oppose to the norms within their own communities. There is often a stigma within marginalized communities that prevents open dialogue about mental health struggles, leading to individuals to suffer in silence or fear that their issues might be not taken as seriously. While eating disorders are often framed as a female issue, the reality is that men are not exempt. Men and boys, especially those who feel pressure to adhere to masculine ideals of strength and muscularity, are increasingly at risk for developing disorders. Men tend to develop eating disorders differently, often with a focus on muscle dysphoria, a condition where individuals become obsessed with their physique and feel as though their bodies are never muscular enough. This can lead to excessive exercise, steroid abuse, or restrictive dieting in order to achieve a certain ideal of masculinity. It is easy to overlook the struggles men have with eating disorders because of the stigma associated with men seeking help for their mental health issues, especially those related to body image. However, more research and attention are now being devoted to understanding how these disorders in men are rising, particularly among athletes and those influenced by portrayals of hypermasculine bodies. When we talk about eating disorders, we often mention anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder. But there are many other forms of disordered eating that do not fit neatly into these categories. For instance, orthorexia is an obsession with healthy eating that goes beyond concern for nutrition to the point where an individual becomes excessively restrictive about what they will eat. While not as widely recognized, orthorexia can have equally dangerous consequences, as people may cut out entire food groups or go days without eating, leading to nutritional imbalances and deficiencies. Another form of an eating disorder that is rising in awareness is diabetic anorexia, where individuals with diabetes may attempt to manage their weight by restricting food and using insulin in dangerous ways. This can have deadly consequences, as it often leads to extreme fluctuations in blood sugar and can increase the risk of life-threatening complications. Athletes, particularly those in sports that emphasize weight categories like wrestling or gymnastics, or those that prize leanness and strengths, such as track and field and cycling, are at high risk of developing eating disorders. The intense pressure to maintain a specific weight or performance, combined with a culture of perfectionism and discipline in sports, often creates an environment ripe for disordered eating habits. Eating disorders do not just manifest in isolation, they often spike during periods of crisis or stress. In moments of uncertainty, fear, and social upheaval, many individuals turn to behaviors that they can control. Global crises, whether financial, political, or health-related, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, can heighten feelings of helplessness or powerlessness, which can exacerbate eating disorders. One of the more modern challenges in the rise of disorders is the role of social media. With platforms like Instagram, TikTok, Tumblr, X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, and even YouTube, people are constantly exposed to idealized images of perfection, often amplified through filters, editing apps, and photo manipulation, and AI. These images can set unrealistic beauty standards, making it harder for those already struggling with body image issues to feel at peace with themselves. In particular, emaciated bodies or photos of extreme weight loss are frequently less aspirational. Social media is also flooded with dieting trends, quick fix solutions, and fitness influencers who promote unhealthy behaviors under the name of wellness. For someone with an eating disorder, constantly being exposed to these curated images and constant streams of diet hacks can be extremely triggering. They reinforce the idea that only one body type is worthy and that happiness, success, and validation come from having a smaller, more controlled body. In some cases, the exposure can push someone deeper into their disordered behaviors. It is crucial that we, speaking as educators, continue to broaden our understanding of eating disorders. They are not confined to a single demographic, and they do not always look the same. Whether it's a young woman struggling with body image, an athlete obsessed with managing their weight for competitions, or a student making fat jokes in the back of the class, eating disorders can take many forms. By recognizing these diverse experiences and offering compassionate, informed support, we can help dismantle the stigma and create a learning environment where those struggling feel seen and understood. If you are facing an eating disorder, remember that help is available. If you are a future educator like myself, and you missed seeing eating disorders on the statistic sheets in class, keep your head up. We can change the future. In the description box below, I have all my sources linked should you need them, and I will have closed captioning available. I would like to finish off by saying that if you need help, ask someone, please. And if you are an educator, look into sources, look into changing the education program. And I hope that you have a good evening, and I hope you found this informational, and I hope that you also found it relaxing. And I hope you have a wonderful evening.